Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's daily devotional. I apologize for being a little late today. Our thought's going to come from John chapter 8, starting in verse 48. Jesus is kind of going back and forth with the Pharisees. He has already told them that they are not the sons of Abraham. They're actually the sons of Satan earlier up here. He says in verse 46, "Which of you convicts me of sin? And if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me?" So none of them can convict him of any sin. "He who is of God hears God's words. Therefore you do not hear because you're not of God." And in verse 48, the Jews answered and said to him, "Do we not say rightly, you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Most assuredly I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death." When Jesus says in verse 49, of course, the Pharisees have been defending themselves all through John chapter 8, and they've been making the claim that they are Abraham's seed and so forth. And when Jesus says, "I don't have a demon, I honor my Father, you dishonor me," that's really a way of saying that you're dishonoring the Father. I honor my Father. I'm doing what He tells me to do. I'm teaching what He tells me to teach. By you dishonoring me, you are therefore dishonoring the Father. And then in verse 50, "I don't seek my own glory. There is one who seeks and judges." Of course, this is all about the Father. Jesus never took any praise to Himself. He never exalted Himself. It was always about the Father. And then verse 51, "Most assuredly I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death." And of course, Jesus isn't speaking literally in terms of physical death. He's speaking spiritual death. Of course, the second death, as is described in the New Testament, is that place of fire and the lake of fire, according to Revelation. So, in John chapter 8 and verse 52, "Then the Jews said to him, 'Now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets. And you say, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste death.'" So notice they bring up the fact that, well, now we know you have a demon. Because Abraham's dead, the prophets are dead. If anyone was going to live forever, certainly they would. But you say, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead? And the prophets are dead. Who do you make yourself out to be? And so there it was actually kind of a actual realization or a decent job of them determining the fact that Jesus, by association of what he's saying, he is saying that he's greater than Abraham and the prophets. In verse 54, Jesus answered, "If I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God." Now, notice that Jesus says, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death. But then the specifics here, when he says in verse 54, "If I honor myself," let me make this a little bit bigger. "If I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me." And of course, the Father is the one who gave him the authority. It is the Father who gave him the things to say. So ultimately, if Jesus says, "If anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste death," and yet he teaches that which came from the Father, then it's the Father's word. And so by association, that's the understanding that Jesus is giving the praise to the Father. "It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God." Of course, Jesus said earlier, but he's not, because you don't listen. "Yet you have not known him, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word." Of course, again, they're trying to prove that Jesus is either crazy, or he's a liar, or that he has a demon. And when Jesus says, "You have not known him, but I know him," Jesus certainly is speaking literally. I mean, Jesus had been in heaven. I mean, in John chapter 17, he even offers a prayer knowing that he's going to die soon, and he talks to the Father about that glory that he once had in heaven with the Father. So certainly Jesus, he remembers being in heaven. I mean, he was there, and he looked forward to being back. So certainly there's a literal, I know him. But then there's also the aspect of God's character, the Father's word, the Father's humility, and the characteristics of the Father. And I think that that's probably just as much as what Jesus is talking about here, because he compares to the fact that they don't know him. You have not known him. And so, nobody has known him the way Jesus did. Nobody's known the Father as being in heaven as Jesus was. But I think Jesus is referring more specifically to the character of the Father, having those characteristics in yourselves, listening and hearing and obeying his word as the Father gave it. But if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you. That's pretty harsh. But even earlier, he said that you're of your father Satan, and he's always been a liar. So I mean, this whole dialogue is pretty harsh from Jesus to these Pharisees. But I do know him, keep his word. Here is kind of the point, or the focal point of John chapter 8, or the culmination, I guess, of John chapter 8. It says in verse 56, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it, and was glad. And then the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham. This statement by Jesus is really interesting, because obviously Abraham didn't literally see the day of Jesus, in the sense that Abraham was alive when Jesus came, or that Jesus came when Abraham was alive. Neither one of those happened. But what Jesus seems to be referring to is the fact that Abraham did know what was going to happen, at least to some extent. Of course, no one had the full picture, according to Peter, that even angels desired to look into this plan of how he was going to save mankind. Even angels desired to know, but they didn't know how the Father was going to bring this about. But in terms of prophecy, in terms of being given an understanding that a Messiah was coming, certainly the prophets, they did know that. They did know to a certain extent that Messiah was going to accomplish. David often referred to Jesus as his Lord, or my Lord, and certainly Moses referred to a prophet who would rise up from among his own people, and you should hear him, a prophet like me, Moses says. And Abraham, though, going as far back as Abraham, he rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. And I think that reference to the fact that Abraham, again, we know according to Hebrews chapter 11 that those Abraham, Sarah, Moses, these all died in faith, not having received the promise, but seeing the promise afar off. They continued to serve God, and they continued to have faith, and they proclaimed themselves pilgrims and sojourners on the earth, recognizing that ultimately they would get to go to heaven. So obviously Abraham knew he knew the promise of heaven. He knew the spiritual nature of heaven. Even David referred to the fact that his soul would not be left in Hades. So the fact that all of this leads to the understanding that Abraham had some realization given to him by God of what was going to happen. And Abraham saw it. He was given that opportunity to understand what was to come. Certainly the promises to Abraham, all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed. Perhaps God, gave him, let me kind of give you a glimpse as to what that's going to be, how that worked. He saw it and was glad. So the Jews, again, they're stuck in a literal physical sense. You're not yet 50 years old and you've seen Abraham. Okay, I mean, we're talking about thousands of years after Abraham, and you're claiming that you've seen Abraham. Of course, notice that they didn't say you claim that Abraham has seen you. no, that you've seen Abraham. Jesus, and of course Abraham, he's the head honcho. He's the father of the Jews. So you bring Abraham into a conversation, it's serious. Verse 58, Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And that very specifically addresses Jesus as being God. That verse 58. And what's interesting about this is the fact that earlier, I gotta sneeze. Earlier, excuse me, sorry. As they're talking about him and they're asking him, who are you to say these things? And at other times they're asking him, what authority do you have to do these things? Jesus, this is perhaps one of the most clearest times that he comes right out and says, I'm God. Okay, not obviously he's the subject to the Father, but he's part of the what we call the Godhead or the divine nature. Before Abraham was, I am. Meaning Jesus existed even before Abraham. Not existed on earth, but he obviously was in heaven even before Abraham was. So he preceded Abraham in the sense of timeline, and as far as timeline goes, and that's what Jesus is referencing. The fact that I have, of course, I am is a reference to what Moses was told to say, who has sent me, when he goes to Egypt to get the Hebrews out of Egypt. The Father says, I am that I am has sent you. And literally it means he that exists, or I that exist, which is to say that I have no need of, I don't depend on anyone for my existence, and I have always been, I have been, I am, and I always will be. And so in verse 59, their reaction, they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. Whether or not, some people ask or think, well, this might have been a miracle of some way that Jesus hid himself and kind of passed through. Did he kind of just, how did he do that? And it may have been some power that Jesus had to do that. I don't know. But regardless, he got out of the situation. But you can see certainly why they were prepared to throw stones at him. Okay, this was probably on par with the type of anger that the Sanhedrin had in Acts chapter 7 with Stephen. I mean, they got to the point where they were so angry they stopped their ears and they ran at him. They gnashed at him with their teeth. They took him out of the city, threw stones at him. Well, I would imagine the same, even though John doesn't record their emotional state, the fact that they're ready in the temple, no less, to throw stones at Jesus, I think they're pretty upset. And they're upset because Jesus made himself out to be I am. Of course, the logical situation here is, well, prove he's not. Go ahead, where's your counter evidence? Prove he's not. Jesus has been speaking all things that are true. He has been doing things that show his power from God, miracles and so forth. His wisdom cannot be, can't even come close to his wisdom. You can't catch him in any kind of logical conundrum because he's too smart for that. He's too smart for you. He always has an answer. So prove he's not I am. Of course they can't. And they can't argue with him, and they can't, that's really what this is about. They cannot argue the wisdom or the law or anything else with Jesus. And I just think that there's a lot there in verse 58 to unpack, that our Messiah, before Abraham was, Jesus not only was, but Jesus I am. Okay, Jesus is God, part of that divine nature, and to know that that Messiah that eventually allowed himself to be killed on the cross, he's now high priest, and he now enters the most holy place for us on our behalf. He intervenes for us, or he intercedes on our behalf. And when we pray through him to the Father. And just it kind of reminds us that, Jesus was in all points tempted as we are. He went through situations in life just as we do, and yet he was without sin. All right. Is this something, again, John chapter 8 is a really interesting chapter. There's a whole lot more here in John chapter 8 that we can look at. But in particular, those last couple of verses, I think, were verse 56 through 59. It kind of very telling about the situation with Jesus, and the Jews, especially the Pharisees, they couldn't handle it. And because they couldn't argue with it, and then Jesus all of a sudden says, I am, making himself out to be on par with God. Not that Jesus was exalting himself, and that's the beautiful thing about it, is that Jesus was simply telling the truth. Jesus wasn't saying, haha, I'm God, you're not. It was, I am. I have always been. I always will be. and they just couldn't handle that. So I think that's interesting that Jesus, perhaps one of the most clearest times where Jesus comes right out and says, I am God. All right, so our next day of the devotional, Lord willing, will be on Thursday at 6:30. Hope to see you all then. Again, I'm sorry for the late start. Y'all, especially those individuals here in Wichita Falls, y'all stay safe. We're having storms kind of come through, so y'all take care.